On August 22, 1939, I was leaving my father's house for the first time. I was leaving to study in Omsk military infantry school. Neither my relatives nor I then did not suppose that we would part for many years and I would never see many of them again. It was a warm morning. August in our area was weatherful, with quiet, gentle days, cool dawns, sprinkling abundant dew on the grass, slightly thinned but still green foliage of trees. At times, however, a harmless cloud would come over the faded blue sky and pour down a light rain that shone like an emerald in the slanting rays of the sun. But the rain subsided just as suddenly. The cloud dissolved in the sky azure, and once again nature was enlightened and youthful. The month of August, the crown of summer and the beauty of the Siberian countryside. Other, pensive and sad, unnoticeably for others more than once wiped away a tear. The father, absorbed in business, tried to look cheerful, saying with all his appearance that, on the contrary, packing was a common thing. Sis Maria could not hide the sadness of parting. Often came up to me, said affectionate words. Where were her resentments, when it seemed to her, for some reason that from the side of relatives to me showed more attention? The day before, we had been visited by numerous relatives, neighbours, friends and comrades. Often in a village everyone is connected by close and distant kinship or good acquaintance. That is why villagers consider it a duty to pay tribute to their host, mistress, to share joy and sorrow together. It is an old good tradition, which is passed from generation to generation. It is maintained even now. In the courtyard stood a horse harnessed to a cart. It was leisurely spreading a bunch of grass, cut by my father, and from time to time it squinted its eyes at the people passing through the yard and shook its mane. It was time to say goodbye to the family. Mother was already not hiding her tears. Maria was sniffing her nose. Father raised his voice. Why cry? You should be happy. The guy's going to serve the motherland. I was in a good mood. However, to the feeling of pride that I had chosen a courageous and respected profession, there was an anxiety of the unknown. What lies ahead? What life will confront me with? My father, Terentij Dmitrievich, at first did not share my choice to devote my life to military service, tried to change my mind, cited my elder brother as an example. Mikhail has served his time, and now he is free to choose a job to his liking. How many things to do on the breadwinner land! We were born on it, and we will go there too. But it was hard to change my mind. At the end of the 30s, there was a great desire of young people to study in military schools. Guys were eager to become commanders of the Red Army and Navy. Only our district enlistment office sent in those years 11 candidates, volunteers to Omsk Military Infantry School. Filip Minovich Zhukov, the chairman of the collective farm Novy Mir, played a big role in the fact that I chose the military profession. A communist with pre-revolutionary experience, he lived in a neighbouring village. There was also a secondary school where I studied and was elected secretary of the Komsomol organization. Despite being busy, Filip Minovich helped us to organize evenings, debates, made speeches, instilled in us love for the motherland, for our native land. When I met him, I learned from his life experience and broadened my political outlook. I must confess that I valued his trust and disposition very much. When Filip Minovich learned about my intention to devote myself to service in the army, in every possible way began to help in the realization of my dream. A few months before the exams at the school advised, Sasha, in the military school you should go as a candidate of the party, and he undertook to help me in this. He found communists with a long history, who gave me recommendations to become a candidate of the All-Union Communist Party. And when I became a communist, he was the first to congratulate me on this significant event. And 3 days later he went with me to the district party committee. On the way he once again checked my knowledge of political issues and gave me a lot of advice. We arrived in the district. We stopped at the building of the district committee. Everything will be fine, Sasha. He shook my hand. Don't worry. It is difficult to convey my excitement before the call to the office of the secretary of the district party committee, N. Chernov, but even more difficult, my jubilation after he shook my hand and handed me a candidate card. The good horse easily carried the peasant's cart along the dirt road that ran through the forests in Siberian Koloks, lowlands, past rivers and streams. My father accompanied me to the district center. 30 kilometers we covered in 5 hours. We drove in silence, each thinking about his own. Pictures of my youth flashed before me. I said goodbye to my native land, dear to my heart forests, blue-eyed lakes. The story of our family's appearance in Siberia came to my memory. In 1908, my grandfather, Dmitry Oltunin, came here from Voronezh province. This was preceded by the following events. The First Russian Revolution reached Voronezh province with some delay, but the events there unfolded so rapidly that in a short period of time, many landowners' estates in the province went up in flames. My grandfather took part in these events. The revolution was suppressed, and the rebels were threatened with retribution, and they moved to uninhabited places. It was a long and difficult journey to Siberia, but all the hardships were somehow forgotten after receiving plots of land. They began. Grandfather built a house. The forest was nearby. The farm grew rapidly. This was facilitated by a large family. By that time, grandfather had 10 children. Sons married, brought wives, and for business. In the First World War and the Civil War, 3 men from our family died, and their widows remained for many more years in the house. My father separated from the family and became an independent owner in the 20th year. By this time, there were already 6 children in our family. 2, a brother and a sister, had died. There were 4 of us left, my older sister Marina, my brother Mikhail, me and my little sister Maria. Grandfather Dmitry died in 1929. My father's younger brother Ivan Dmitrievich became the head of his farm. A week after my grandfather's funeral, he joined the collective farm. Uncle Ivan graduated from the courses of field growers. In 1932, he became the chairman of the collective farm. The war tore him away from peaceful affairs. He went to the front, walked along the roads of war thousands of kilometers. He stayed alive. Having returned from the front till the end of his life, he headed the collective farm New Life in the village of Steklianka. The road went downhill. The well-fed, well-groomed horse trotted along the dirt road. Look at him. I scold you. My father shook his head. He's spoiling me? No, he's probably remembering the nighttime rides. Anything can happen. KVN, Sasha, I don't have to tell you, is the smartest of pets. We drove up to the forest, on the edge of which I'd been out with the guys more than once at night. We, teenagers, were proud that adults trusted us to herd horses, and what satisfaction you feel at the age of 15 from the consciousness that you are able to stay the night in the forest, protecting the horses from wolves. Summer nights flew by quickly. The dawn came, the horses were taken away and driven to the village. We went home and couldn't sleep for a long time under the impression of the night, and what to say, we were looking forward to the next trip to the night. When approaching one of the numerous lakes, my father interrupted the long silence. Look, what a beautiful lake. Siberian lakes are similar to each other, except for their size. High reeds grow along their shores, sometimes occupying most of the water surface. In reed thickets there are clean places, chistinas as they are called in our country. There is a lot of various waterfowl game in the lakes. There are also fish, mainly crucian carp. There is also a lake near Steklianka. Sometimes you look at the water surface covered with fog and can't take your eyes off it. It seems that something special is happening there. Some shadows are moving. Incomprehensible sounds are coming. You are waiting for something that you have never seen before. The lake was especially beautiful at dawn, when the sun dyed the viscous wisps of fog pink. In bad harvest years, the lake saved the villagers from starvation. The entire male population then became fishermen and hunters. There were a lot of ducks and geese on our lake. In spring, when the birds started nesting, we watched them closely. When the eggs appeared in the nests, according to the tradition established in the village, we boys would go by boat to the reeds, and there we'd go skiing. Yes, don't be surprised, via skis. We used them to move through the reeds from nest to nest. We collected hundreds of eggs a day. No harm was done to the fauna. The birds replenished their eggs and sat down to incubate their chicks. At this time, we took care to protect the peace of birds from any aliens. As fall approached, the birds took wing. The hunting season opened. For the villagers, it was a holiday, and for us children, a beautiful sight. We watched from the sidelines and waited impatiently when we would be allowed to take a gun in our hands. In the middle of our way to the district centre, there was a forest with difficult-to-pass-through thickets and ravines, overgrown with dense bushes, where there were wolves. In the last years before the war, there were a lot of them. In the fall, and especially in the winter time, they went out to prey far away from their habitats. Hunters followed them, determined by their tracks where the wolves stopped for the day, and organized a roundup on them. Where 2 groups were created. One was the pursuers, whose task was to drive the beast out of the forest, and the other was the hunters. They stood around the forest. We teenagers were enrolled in the first group. We would get on skiers with ratchets in our hands, and 2 or 3 hunters with rifles would be with us. At the appointed hour, the roundup would begin with shouting, crackling, and shots. The wolves would break out of their places, run out to a flat place in the field. The riders would rush after them. Up to a dozen successful, up to a dozen predators, and sometimes more, were brought home by the men during the hunt. After several roundups, the damage to the peasant economy from the beast was noticeably reduced. For us teenagers, participation in hunting brought, besides interest and benefit, we hardened physically, learned courage. Winters in Siberia are long and cold. In my village, there was only an elementary school at that time. The secondary school was in another village, 6 kilometers from Steklianka. There was a boarding school at the school, but we did not want to live in it, and as soon as the weather was more or less suitable, we got on skis and went home. There were times when a blizzard would hit us on the way, and then we would hold on to each other so that we would not get lost in the snowy whirlwind. Our parents were horrified by our appearance in such bad weather. We got up early in the morning. In good weather we skied back to school, and in bad weather one of the adults took us there, wrapped in fur coats and toboggans on sledges. During vacations we helped our parents with household chores. In the early 30s, Kulak elements in the village did their blackdy. They set fire to cattle yards and crops. To protect the crops, towers were built. We, the pioneers, were engaged for duty on them. I remember the year 1934. It was a very productive year. There were not enough people for harvesting in the villages, and the school stopped classes in September. We 13, 14-year-old boys were happy to realize that we were sent to help the collective farmers during the harvest days. I spent the whole harvest next to Uncle Ivan, the husband of my father's sister, on the Lobogreka, the driver. 3 horses were harnessed to it. Uncle Ivan was removing swaths from the scythe, dropping them on the ground. The wheat was high and thick, and he was sweating from hard work. I tried to replace him, but literally after a dozen or 2 meters I was swamped with wheat. This fall the villagers worked with a special vigor. Fatigue was killing them, but people did not leave the field. They wanted to harvest before the rains, and they achieved their goal. The farm paid off the state for the previous dry years and exceeded the plan. That year my father gave me a guitar, the first musical instrument in our house. I mastered playing the guitar quite quickly, and it became my constant companion. My father often brought us children, gifts from the market or from the fair, from the village of Andriivka, with which the history of our family is connected. Grandfather Dmitri lived there until he got a plot of land in Steklianka. There was a hospital in Andriivka. All the fellow villagers were treated there. Many years later, my first son was born in this hospital. I was traveling with my father. I felt his shoulder, and I was sad about the upcoming separation from him. To us, children, he was not particularly strict, always, if possible, considered our wishes, but one event remained in my memory for the rest of my life. It was like this. One day, my little sister Maria and I were sitting on the windowsill. Across the street, the glaziers from the neighbors were glazing the windows. It was fall. The wind was tearing the last leaves from the trees. We were spoiled. I pushed Masha, the broken glass rang, and she flew out the window. One of the glaziers shouted, "There's more work for us." Father came running into the hut. It was the first time I'd ever seen him so angry. He took off his belt, and I stood there mesmerized, waiting to see what would happen next. He hit me. "Why are you standing there?" yelled my father. "Run, I can hurt you now." I didn't move. My father dropped the belt and took me in his arms. I didn't cry, and only when my mother came up, hugged me, and began to reprimand my father, I burst into tears. My mother, Irina Andreevna Stemaeva, was a natural Siberian. Her grandfathers and great-grandfathers had settled here long ago. My mother had a kind character. She was affectionate and friendly with everyone. She loved children very much. She tried not to spoil us, but we never heard a rude word from her. However, she was firm in her decisions, Siberian character. Siberia, Siberian, these are 2 words close to me. Siberia gave birth and gives birth to wonderful hard workers, brave warriors. I think that the time will come when the image of a Siberian warrior will be marked with even greater expressiveness in artistic works and works of art. I am proud that I was born in this region. I dreamed of serving in Siberian divisions, but this opportunity never presented itself during the war. Although after the war I was honored to command the Rogachev Rifle Division, the first commander of which was the former head of the Omsk military school. Colonel L. G.N. Gertiev. In the character of the Siberian laid simplicity, humanity, modesty, reaching shyness. Rarely meet a Siberian with unrestrained character. But the Siberian's virtue until time, where it is necessary to stand up for truth and justice, he transforms, will fight for the right thing to the end. Harsh climatic conditions bring people closer together. Mutual help to each other is an immutable law. Many times I thanked fate for the fact that I was born and grew up in this harsh land. Perhaps I survived the hardships of the front easier than my comrades in the war, natives of other places. Already in my childhood years, I developed a need to do everything as best as possible. If something did not work out, I was very worried. I went to school at the age of 7. I studied well. With my older brother, we had an unspoken competition who would be praised more by parents for his studies. Michael always had a lot of things to do outside the house, so he often got "you should." Father and mother reproached him many times, saying, "You should take an example from your younger brother. He came from school and already had time to do his homework, and you only come from a party." I remember the days spent in the field camps, although they were primitively equipped, but there was a place to sleep and cook food. It was quite enough. True, there were a lot of mosquitoes in summer. They harassed people. But night came, tired villagers fell asleep, and early in the morning they got up and immediately got down to business. And what a wonderful time. Haymaking season. People are in a good mood. They had recently finished spring sowing, and now they were switching to new work. Haymaking in the village is a holiday. We, school children, took an active part in it. Here, as nowhere else, our labour found its application. We tedded and collected dry grass in stack. Our rest was in labour. We could not imagine it any other way. And how could we do nothing when our parents worked from dawn to dawn? By their example, they taught us the main thing in life, honest labour. My comrades and I were always concerned about how to help the collective farm more. I remember at one of the COMSOL committee meetings at the school, we talked about the fact that we could not be satisfied just by participating in various kinds of emergency work. The idea of participation in public control was born. The party organization of the collective farm New World supported us. The posts were created. Raids were organized to check the readiness of equipment for the sowing campaign and harvesting. The storage fund, cattle yards for winter, to check the state of the seed fund, laying fodder for the winter, not without skeptics, who at first treated our events as fun. But when we began to delve into the farm, Philip Minovich-Shukov nicknamed us his eyes. Many of those who worked badly were dragged to the board after the raids. We were resented and some villagers even hated us, but we continued to show more and more initiative and took a deeper interest in collective farm affairs. Big and small events continued to intermingle in my mind. During the years of industrialization, the country turned into a huge construction site. Many of my fellow villagers went to the construction sites. Among them were my older sister Marina and brother Mikhail. Marina participated in the construction of Komsomolsk-on-Amur, a city about which the whole country was talking in those years. Marina got married there. She gave birth to a daughter, Tamara. Her older sister died in 1941. Tamara still lives in Khabarovsk. Brother Mikhail worked on the Amur in Troitsk timber farm. He became a labor striker. In 1941, near Moscow, was seriously wounded, died in hospital. The younger sister Maria, after mother's death, went to the north, where she got married. Maria is the closest surviving relative. See, the horse ran briskly along the rolled road. I remembered how in the fall, together with my peers, was called to the district military enlistment office for military registration. The military commissars spoke to us about the threat of war, about the sinister role of German fascism. Then for the first time I had the idea of enrolling in a military school. I did not share my dream with anyone for a long time, although it was increasingly overwhelming me. I really liked people dressed in military uniforms. We usually saw them after demobilization. The uniforms attracted our boyish attention. I do not know any peer who would not look with envy at a person dressed in a military uniform. In 1938, various paramilitary classes and exercises were held with the conscripts and conscripts. I remember well a district exercise. It was led by the secretary of the district party committee, the chairman of the district executive committee, and the district military commissar. Units were established in each village. I remember I was assigned to reconnaissance. At the appointed hour, the units occupied the initial areas. The reconnaissance reported the location of the enemy. The commanders made a decision, started moving main forces under the cover of guards, then the attack took place. For us conscripts, it was the first training battle. The events on Lake Kazan and on Kholkhin Gol convinced me of the rightness of choosing the military profession. I was seriously preparing to enter the Omsk Military Infantry School. In summer I trained in running, and in winter in skis. My father interrupted the long silence. "We will miss you, son and grandmother, and nothing to say." I involuntarily remembered her kind face, her quiet, affectionate voice. How many happy moments she brought us, her grandchildren. She was always surrounded by children. We reached out to her. She could settle our troubles, calm us down. At the same time, she was strict and exacting. However, her strictness was always necessary, made the guilty think about their offense. For those who did good, she always had a kind word. Her life was not easy. Having received in her youth a small education, she worked as a governess for a landowner. It seemed that now the river of her life will flow away from rural cares. However, she took and married a fellow villager, Dmitry Altunin. She gave birth to 16 children. 2 died in childhood. The rest grew up. Sons married and daughters got married. Numerous grandchildren appeared. When everyone sat down to eat in grandfather's house, there was barely enough room at the wide, long oak table. Grandfather always sat at the head of the table. They never sat down to eat for long. Grandfather valued time. I remember how he treated us kids. As soon as someone was idle in the yard, he immediately found him a job. He was very agile, and his energy infected everyone around him. He liked to repeat. A lazy worker does the work twice. Our grandmother was our protector. Only she alone could take away his anger from the one who caught his eye without doing anything. Grandma off to go mushrooming. She was usually accompanied by a group of kids. When approaching the forest, she counted us. In the thicket, from time to time, her voice was heard, and we always knew where she was. Our grandmother was very neat, always went in a clean dress, often looked in the mirror, checked if everything was in order, corrected the handkerchief on her head, and she did not change her habit even when she became over 70. Despite the strict attitude to religion in the village, she did not believe in God. She performed church rituals out of habit, so to speak, for the sake of ritual. We saw this, approved of her. She died in April 1945, a few days before Victory Day. Not reaching the district centre, my father suggested walking, so to speak, to stretch our legs. A few hundred meters we walked in silence, but then my father put his hand on my shoulder. "Near, Sasha, we have arrived." Ahead was the district centre Artesh. Like many villages founded by Cossacks during the development of the Siberian expanses, it got its name from the river on the bank of which it stood. It was wooden, with a wide square, with a red former ataman's house and a church. We had no business in the district centre. My father soon arranged with the driver of a hitchhiking car to give me a ride to Omsk. The farewell was short. We hugged each other man to man. I passed the entrance exams, passed the credentials committee, and was enrolled as a cadet. We were placed in the barracks. We began to get acquainted with our comrades. The guys were mostly from working and peasant families. There were many Red Army soldiers and junior commanders of the Red Army. On the second day, we were outfitted, and the next morning we started training. Mostly we were engaged in formation training. At first we were very tired. After the training day, it seemed that we would not get up the next day. But the time of rising came. We were on our feet and ran to exercise. After breakfast, we went to classes. Gradually, we got into the rhythm of the educational process. Omsk Infantry School, named after M.V. Frunze, was created in the early years of Soviet power. It was located in the premises of the former Cadet Corps. Beautiful classrooms, auxiliary rooms, canteen, household facilities amazed us. From the first day, we tried to fulfill all the requirements of the school canons. True, not always and not everyone succeeded, but the desire to learn allowed us to overcome all difficulties. The time turned out to be extremely saturated. Fire, tactical, political formation, physical training, general education disciplines. How could you list all the things you had to do? We were thoroughly prepared for the military profession. Meanwhile, the Finnish campaign began. We were proud of the exploits of soldiers and commanders. And what to sin, we dreamed of seeing ourselves in battles with the enemy. Commanders, teachers prepared us seriously for the trials of wartime. We remembered the outings to the winter camp. We left by battalion for 10 days. Life in the camp followed the field daily routine. After morning rise, we ran out of tents. a short warm-up. Then we got on skis and ran 4 kilometers. By the way, all movements were made only on skiers. A ski pyramid was equipped near each tent. For Siberians who had skis as their main way of transportation in winter, since they were small. The regime was not difficult. As for the cadets who came to the school from other parts of the country, they had a hard time. However, they also learned the science of skiing. They had no right to move around the camp in any other way. I remember the first hour of ski training. The platoon commander lined us up. He showed us skiing techniques, how to stand and move on them. Then he gave the command. We without sticks went in a circle, practicing gliding. Not everyone could do it right away. Some of my classmates struggled to move, fell, losing their balance. For me, the reception was not difficult. I slid freely on the ice. The leader asked who taught me how to ski so easily. Woof. Who? Everyone in Steklianka skis like that. What's that in Steklianka? I had to explain the location of my home village. The platoon commander suggested a big lap. I ran that lap with pleasure, and the platoon commander immediately appointed me his assistant in ski training. Of course, the main training time in the camp was devoted to tactics and firearms training. We had to act mainly in the role of a squad leader. It was a good school of our formation. I will tell you more about one such field trip. We started preparing for it well in advance. We listened to lectures, not once travelled to the field to solve flight tests. We checked and adjusted our equipment. On the eve of the exit, we had a good rest, listened to political information. At the appointed time, the battalion was lined up at the formation. The head of the school, Colonel L.N. Gertiev, took the report of our commander, familiarized with the purpose of the exit. Inside the city, the battalion was assigned a training and combat task. Started marching on skis. Blizzard was blowing. The wind threw handfuls of snow into the heated faces. "Damn it, heavenly office," muttered one of the cadets. "That's why we came out to try ourselves," Eunice said the platoon commander in reply. "That's right." The conversation was interrupted by an introduction. During the march, we deployed, attacked the enemy, fought counter battles, escaped from pursuit. Late in the evening, we entered a pine forest. It was quiet here. A rare snowball was falling. Pines and firs were singing their eternal song. We started to equip our lodging. We built huts for 12-15 people. Inside, we covered them with a thick layer of lapnik. Soon the huts became warm and smelled of tar. We started cooking food. Dinner from concentrate seemed tasty. The battalion commander allocated a guard. Colonel L.N. Gertiev twice at night went around the camp, checking the service, went into the huts. Before dawn, the alarm was given. Battalion, in a matter of minutes, gathered, stood on skis, and moved to destroy the enemy airborne landing force. When we had covered 15 kilometers, the late January sun silvered the tops of the trees. It was a weather day. 2 days passed in the decision of flying treks. On the 3rd day, we approached a settlement. We settled down at home. It is difficult to explain the pleasure we experienced from the warmth of peasant huts and tasty food. Time was running fast. It seemed that we had just recently arrived in the village when the voice of the trumpet sounded. The villagers saw us off with love. The Finnish campaign had touched this small village. 2 families received funerals. The villagers took our short stay with some special joy. Being among ordinary people, we felt how necessary our labor, the labor of the defender of the motherland. When approaching Omsk, we received an order to attack the counterweight on the outskirts of the city. We took off our skis. Having turned around, the battalion moved forward rapidly. It was the last of our rush, with maximum dedication of forces. A friendly hurrah announced the neighborhood. After the attack, the battalion formed up on the road. At the head of the column became a band. To the sound of the march, moved through the streets of the city. Walked firmly, forgetting about fatigue. The townspeople looked at us with interest. We arrived at the location of the school, put our weapons and equipment in order. Then there was a bath with a Siberian steam room. Colonel L.N. Gertiev's school was not always and not everyone liked, but, having become officers, many of us remembered him with gratitude. During the harsh years of war, it helped the students of the school to endure all the hardships. In my memory, Leonty Nikolaevich Gertiev remained a kind, strict, fair mentor. At the beginning of the war, Leonty Nikolaevich became the head of the division formed on the basis of the school. With it, he went to Stalingrad. His Siberians were not once distinguished in the battles on the Volga. Then Gertiev's division participated in the Battle of Kursk. That's where our former head of the school died. So the Communist Party, the Soviet government, in anticipation of the fight with imperialism, expanded the training of military personnel. At the end of February 1940, an order was received to allocate battalions to the newly organized schools. Our battalion was intended for the infantry school in the city of Novosibirsk, where we left in early March. The Novosibirsk school was created on the basis of the unit stationed here earlier. In spite of some troubles with settling in, we started our studies. Soon the Finnish campaign was over. Frontline soldiers began to return. Some of them were appointed as commanders or teachers at the school. We looked at them with envy. We absorbed everything they told us from their experience. They were unusual people for us. They had to be in battles to break through the Mannerheim line. The training process began to be reorganized, taking into account the experience of military actions against the White Finns. Classes were as close as possible to the situation of real combat. Summer of the 40s came. In May we went to a summer camp on the Tom River in the Kemerovo region. A beautiful place. A pine forest, a river, wherever you look. The vast expanses of Siberia. The summer was dry and warm. From early morning until late evening we continued to master the training program. Much attention was still paid to tactics, firearms training, physical conditioning. We took all classes seriously. Marching weekends were filled to the limit. Competitions. Marching throws, we learned to swim in full equipment. School training during the war helped me many times when forcing large and small rivers. With what gratitude I remembered my teachers. At the school I was promoted to the military rank of Deputy Political Commander and appointed Deputy Political Commander of the company. Apparently, the choice fell on me because I studied well, was a candidate for party membership, taking care of the design of visual propaganda in the Lenin Room, holding talks, reading conferences, establishing ties with our boss, one of the faculties of the Institute of Railway Engineers. The secretary of the Komsomol organization of our company was Kolya Ivanov, a fellow Omsk, a good comrade and interesting person. He graduated from the Aero Club, but for some reason he did not get into the aviation school. Thanks to Kolya's enthusiasm and assertiveness, we were able to hold many interesting events. How many fans gathered, for example, competitions in disassembly and assembly of weapons, overcoming obstacles. During my studies at the school, I probably never got as close to anyone as I did with Nikolai. During the war years, Nikolai Ivanov finished flight courses and returned to aviation. He fought bravely. He retired from the armed forces as a colonel from the post of commander of an aviation regiment. Current cadets of higher military command schools will probably be interested to know that our school had a cavalry squadron at that time, and in the program we had horse training, when for the first time I sat on a horse with full ammunition. Admittedly, I felt insecure, although I had some experience of riding horses when I lived in the village. On winter weekends we were allowed, as an outing, to ride our horses into the field. We'd get into pairs. One would get on the horse and the other, holding onto the rope with his hands, would roll behind him on skis. Then the cadets would switch places. It was a fascinating activity. Imagine 100 riders and behind them 100 skiers rushing across the field, and neither frost nor snowstorms were a hindrance for us. On the eve of 1941, we visited the tailoring shop of a military store. We were measured there for sewing the commander's uniform. This once again reminded us of the imminent change in our lives. I remember the meeting of the new year, 1941. Command and supervisory staff of the school gathered in the club. In the festively decorated hall were set tables, reigned fun, jokes. I was invited to this evening together with other deputy political commanders. At that time, none of those present at the evening did not think or guess that it was the last one before the war. Our studies in the winter and spring of the 41st differed from the previous semesters in their intensity and tension. The training was based on the methods of practical training of future platoon commanders for combat operations. The head of the training department, Major Alexeyev, personally checked the preparation of leaders for classes, the training base, and even us, the cadet. Alexeyev was an excellent marshal, had a marvelous in sound and strength of voice. He was in charge of all the formation of the school and the troops of the garrison at the parades, brilliantly coping with these duties. I had a chance to meet this man in 1952 in the Turkestan military district. He came to us as a colonel to the post of deputy commander of the division, and I was at that time chief of staff of this compound. We recalled the time spent in the Novosibirsk school. Soon Alexeyev was appointed head of the Tashkent military school named after Lenin. The session of the spring of the 41st year came. As in previous years, we went to summer camp. We're in a great mood. The last months before graduation. A new life ahead of us. The closer the end of studies, the more responsibility for everything we lived, dreamed about in heated arguments, and short cadet dreams fell on our shoulders. For the last time, we went to the training field of the summer camp on the bank of the broad, smoothly flowing Siberian grasses. Timothy grass, labaznik, tuntnog, sainfoin, sagebrush, tipchak, green carpet covered the training field, and only in some places there were mighty pines and young birches. On the opposite bank of the river stretched a ridge of hills covered with dense forest. The sun was scorching, and we took shelter from its burning rays in the shade of birches and pines. We had just passed the state exams and were waiting for the order of the People's Commissar of Defense to be promoted to lieutenants and appointed to command positions in the troops. In the group of cadets, seated under a tall pine tree, there was excitement. The cadets sit in a wide circle, in the center of which on the canvas laid out details of machine gun. Short, stocky Lieutenant Efimenko, commander of the cadet platoon, blindfolded by touch assembles the machine gun lock. He assembled it, put it in place and pressed the trigger. Hearing the characteristic click, Efimenko removed the blindfold. Well, that's it. The machine gun is ready for action. With a slight chuckle looking at his former students, he asked, "Remember, friends, the episode from Chapayev, chains of Kapelyovtsi inevitably looming on the lying infantry, and the machine gun is silent. The faces of the enemy are already visible. It's a few more seconds. The Kapelyovtsi will rush to the attack, and then Batanka machine gunner opened a timely destructive fire. The enemy was turned into flight. Anka deliberately delayed, waiting for a convenient moment. But it may happen that the machine gun will fail in battle because of a malfunction, which can be easily eliminated. That's where your excellent knowledge of weapons will come in handy." Efimenko was silent and suddenly asked, "Well, who will take to disassemble and reassemble the lock in the same time as me?" I resolutely stepped to the machine gun. Cadet Altunin. "Permission to try?" "Try," me smiled Efimenko friendly, and, while I was blindfolded, began to draw the tactical background. In 500 meters from us appeared the advancing enemy. The platoon is aiming fire from rifles, but the only machine gun is silent. We have to replace it. Cadet Altunin, act. I disassembled the lock, and the platoon commander every 10 seconds noted how many meters the enemy infantry approached the attack line. The first half of the operation, judging by the approving roar, I did it in perfect time. The familiar arrangement of parts helped me to assemble without losing precious seconds. Meanwhile, the commander's voice sounded more and more anxious. He's about to announce that the enemy is running at us. Pooh! With a crack slammed the lid of the box. I pressed the trigger and heard a click. The lock is assembled correctly. The machine gun opened fire. When I tore the blindfold from my eyes, I immediately found myself in the strong embrace of comrades. And Efimenko stood thoughtfully aside. On the face of the lieutenant wandered a smile of satisfaction. His labors were not wasted. Having dismissed my comrades, I walked up to the commander. "Fulfillment of the assigned task finished, Comrade Lieutenant." "Well done." Efimenko shook my hand and asked me with undisguised surprise, "When did you manage to get so good at it?" I told him about the evening training. Having listened to me carefully, Efimenko said that the acquired knowledge would be useful for me in training my subordinates. How could the lieutenant know that the skills I had developed to automaticity in handling the machine gun would be needed not on the training field, but in deadly battles with the enemy? Noticing the messenger running towards us, Lieutenant Efimenko interrupted the conversation. The cadets crowded behind his back. The messenger stopped in front of the platoon commander and, catching his breath, reported, "The Comrade Lieutenant, the battalion commander ordered to return to camp immediately. At 12:00 a general formation is scheduled." Having quickly disassembled our weapons, we set out on the road by forced march, as our lieutenant called this type of movement. 5 minutes of running, 5 minutes of accelerated step. At the camp, we were ordered to change into our exit uniforms and line up in a formation. The formation was commanded by a tall, wiry colonel, the deputy head of the school for the formation part. On the right flank took the place of the band. Colonel Dobrovolsky, the head of the school, showed up. Accepting the report, he came to the middle of the formation. "Hello, comrades," greeted us the head of the school. Having listened to the friendly answer with a smile and ordered to bend the flanks of the ranks, he found himself in the middle of the semicircle. Taking a folder from the head of the formation department who accompanied him, Colonel Dobrovolsky solemnly announced, "Order of the People's Commissar of Defense of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic on the personnel of the Army, June 10, 1941, the city of Moscow. Cadets who graduated from the Novosibirsk Infantry School, in accordance with the decree of the CC and Sync of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics of September 22, 1935, on the introduction of personal military ranks of the Red Army to award the military rank of lieutenant and assign." The head of the school loudly and clearly called the names of graduates and military units or institutions to which they were assigned. Finally, I heard my name, Altun Alexander Terentьевich, platoon commander of the 720th Rifle Regiment. Most of the graduates were assigned to units located in the western regions of the country. After the solemn formation, we were given the commander's uniforms and equipment, sewn in advance in the workshop of the military store and waiting in the warehouse. So by evening, all the graduates were already dressed in carefully pressed uniforms, clasping clipboards and field bags to their creaky belts. I think that if we had received gas masks, we would have hung them on ourselves. We wanted to look like commanders as soon as possible. Only an empty holster for a revolver was embarrassing, but a way out was found tightly stuffed with paper. It immediately acquired a combat look. The last camp night was extremely stuffy. I couldn't sleep. Probably many people are familiar with this feeling. A part of life goes to the past, and you stand on the threshold of something new, not yet explored. And it is a pity to part with what was, and other horizons beckon. Will expectations be justified? Will hopes be realized? Pulling on pants and boots, I left the tent and wandered through the hushed camp. How much sweat has been shed here? Drills, hikes, marching to and from the firing range, overcoming the assault course, classes. In the last winter, the head of the school took out one by one all battalions for hardening, as he said. We lived in cold barracks, spent 2 or 3 days day and night in the woods by the fire. Some grumbled. Why, they said, such torture. After wandering around the camp, I returned to the tent, as if saying goodbye to the past, instantly fell asleep. After morning toilet and breakfast, we put our things on the truck, and with raincoats on our left hand, we went to the nearest station. We walked along a field road overgrown with grass and felt like chicks making their first flight. They walked freely, with jokes, for the first time not observing the balance. The station was not more than 3 kilometers away when the midday heat soaked the 19-year-old lieutenants. Even the keen-witters, who would rather hold a hot coal in their mouths than a sharp word, were silent. Noticing the fatigue, the former company petty officer, a tall, shouldered Lieutenant Gagarin, in a loud voice gave the command, "Sing." The formation closed. The steppe became clear, sounded hard blows of leather soles on the dry ground. We heard the muffled voice of Nikolai Vestakov, pulling a song about the famous 30th Irkutsk Division, distinguished in the battles at the Chunga crossing. The lieutenants, dashingly, with whistling, picked up the refrain. What a good song means if fatigue was gone. We entered the station village, humming our step with a humorous song on the motif of a popular gypsy romance. "Don't remember me ditches," we sang, winking, "Farewell, my camp. I'm crawling for the last time." At the station, a special train was already standing ready to take us to Novosibirsk. From the station to the school, the graduates demonstrated brilliant drill. One chanter was replaced by another, even more vocal. Cheerful young voices shook the streets of Novosibirsk, which were hushed in the summer twilight. Gawkers crowded on the sidewalks. Lively faces could be seen in the open windows. Old men smiled wistfully, probably remembering their military youth, and young people, especially girls, waved to the lieutenants. One could hear exclamation, "Nokaniya, Pushkarev," greetings and congratulations. Mistake. Don't forget to say goodbye. And the lieutenants only squinted their eyes and stamped their step more firmly. The last night in the barracks, which replaced our home, was unusually noisy. We recalled our years of study, discussed assignments. From the orders we received, we knew where each of us would go tomorrow. I was to serve in the Kharkov military district. "Oh, you are lucky, my friend," exclaimed Vasya Zaleriatsky, a dense, stout man with envy. "You will see my Ukraine." I noticed that, worrying, Vasya was switching to his native language. Have you been there or not? Except for Omsk and Novosibirsk, I've never been anywhere. Okay, Klapchis Zeleriatsky continued, dreamily rolling his eyes, mixing Russian and Ukrainian words. You don't know what Ukraine is like. These are huts and gardens all around, and the steppe has no end and no edge, like the sea. And the wheat fields are endless, and the corn is taller than you. No, there's no more beautiful land than the Ukraine. It was tempting to visit Ukraine, but tensions were growing on our far eastern border, especially after the events at Lake Hassan and on the Kolkhingo River. A powerful Japanese army was concentrated there. These circumstances gave reason to believe that those who were assigned to the Far East would be the first to receive a baptism of fire. First of all, it seemed to me they would have to cross arms with the samurai, defending the inviolability of our borders. Therefore, I looked at the future Far Easterners with special reverence. One of my comrades, Andrei Melkatukov, disagreed and strongly argued that we would have to fight the Germans. Andrei did not support his conviction with references to any sources or his personal assessment of international relations. He followed in the argument approximately the same method as Ostap Bender used to refute the statements of the scholarly priests who proved that God existed. After listening to the arguments of those who considered the closest war with the samurai, Melkatukov unhesitatingly declared, "And I am convinced we will fight with Germany." The next day we left the walls of the school forever. A group of commanders who were going to Kharkov military district handed in their suitcases in the luggage room, scattered around the city for farewell visits. According to the established order, lieutenants immediately after graduation were given a month's leave, and then they went to the place of service. But we, to our great dismay, were not given leave. We were told that we would receive it upon arrival at the place of service. We had to inform our relatives about it. I sent a telegram to my relatives in Omsk, in which I informed them of the number of the train and the carriage. For the last time I walked along the familiar places. Here is the street along which we daily took evening walks in formation. For a few minutes I sat in the shade of a tall oak tree on a wooden bench, which served as a meeting place with acquaintances. I took a farewell look at the movie theatre, where we happened to watch new movies on weekends. You get used not only to people, but also to cities. Leaving Novosibirsk, I left a piece of my heart in it. In the evening, the platform near where the train was standing was crowded with departing and seeing off relatives, friends, and just gawkers. A few minutes before the departure of the train, the departing passengers climbed into the cars and crowded around the open window. Only the lonely ones lingered on the platform, listening to the last farewells of their loved ones. A full red-haired woman in a pink dress sobbed unashamedly, clutching to the breast of the embarrassed Lieutenant Nastenkin, nicknamed Nastenka because of his surname and puny appearance. "Nastenka," shouted one of his friends, "pack her in a suitcase and take her with you, then send her back at low speed." The last words were drowned in thunderous laughter. Everyone knew that the red-haired woman, who worked at the school as a hairdresser, had already been married. Twice she had left her hometown, following her husbands, and each time for some reason she had come back. Perhaps now she would have followed the next husband, but there were orders to go to the destination without families. At last the third stroke of the station bell sounded. The train slowly moved. We, 4 lieutenants, cosily settled in the compartment of a parlour car and decided to celebrate the beginning of a new stage of our lives. We laid out a simple snack on a small window table and poured wine into cut glasses. When the last buildings of the city flashed by, Andrei Melkatukov, a brown-eyed guy with short dark hair, raised his glass and with joking solemnity proclaimed, "Farewell, Novosibirsk. Will we ever see you again? To our city friends, to our native school." If Andrei Melkatukov could look into the not-so-distant future, he would know that he had said goodbye to the city of youth forever, that in a little more than a month a fascist bullet would cut short his life in battle on the Belarusian land. But a man's happiness lies in not knowing the end of his life's journey. Until the last minute he hopes for the best, for a long and necessarily happy life. No sooner had we finished our modest dinner than Andrei Sedyukov, the most silent of our company, who was always reading something, suddenly shifted the appetizers and knocked over a bottle of wine. "What are you doing, Andrei?" Melkatukov was indignant. "Are you crazy? Have you forgotten that you're sitting at the table? You almost threw our whole dinner on the floor." "But wait a minute," Serdyukov waved away annoyingly. "Listen to what TASS reports." And, clearly pronouncing each word, He read the TASS statement of June 14, 1941, emphasizing that rumors of Germany's intention to break the pact and attack the USA are devoid of any ground. Then he handed the newspaper to Melkotikov, and with undisguised irony said, "And you claim that the Germans will be the first to start a mess. You see, the TASS statement and your opinion do not coincide." "Our telegraph agency," replied Melkotikov. "He of course knows what to state. But I'm convinced there can be no peace between the fascists and us, no matter how much you feed the wolf, but he still looks into the forest. No matter how much you please the fascist, but his brigand nature will take its own. It is not without reason that fascists have been arming themselves for so many years and taking over one country after another." "Samurai are no better," objected Serdyukov. How much blood did they spoil for the Soviet people? Therefore it is not excluded that the guys who are going to the Far East now will have to smell gunpowder before we do." "Samurai have no guts." Melkotikov waved his hand contemptuously. "The Germans are stronger and more dangerous. I'm sure it is us who will have to be the first to take the baptism of fire." Lieutenant Melkotikov did not realize how close to the truth his words were. In our hearts, we hoped that the war, a matter of a short time. In any case, everyone was making plans for the upcoming vacation. Melkotikov, having forgotten in a minute the argument about the war, told me with fervor that as soon as he got a vacation, he would marry at once. The bride couldn't wait for him, and his parents wrote that everything was ready for the wedding. A 4-pound hog was fattened, and 2 sheep and chickens, geese and ducks were waiting for the hour to be on the wedding table. In short, the plans were the most joyful and peaceful. On a bright June evening, our train rolled up to the platform of Omsk station. Jumping out of the car, I immediately noticed my Aunt Makrida Dmitrievna hurrying towards me in a colourful scarf tied under her chin. Her petite figure moved easily on the platform. As she ran up to me, she jumped up, and her small, thin, but clinging hands clasped my neck tightly. Often blinking her tear-stained eyes, she showered me with kisses. "Miss Asher, my darling, my kindest aunt was babbling joyfully. So we have met at last. My aunt would probably not have let me out of her arms soon, if it had not been for the gypsy man who came after her." "Enough of your drooling, woman," he said in a bass voice. "Let us say hello." Having lifted his wife, Pyotr Semyonovich Dyakov easily dismissed her, and, like a bear, clinched me in such a way that I, in spite of my rather strong physique, feared for the integrity of my ribs. Pyotr Semyonovich looked me over, checked my equipment like a harness on a horse before setting off on a long journey, and smoothed his dishevelled moustache with calloused fingers. "Good, you devil," he exclaimed admiringly. "How big he has grown, even outstripped me. Brave, by God, a brave look." And, glancing at the cubes in his buttonholes, he asked, "What's your rank?" "Lieutenant, comrade, uncle," I jokingly stretched out, dashingly putting my hand to my visor. To what, for example, officer rank of the Tsarist army can be equalled? The old soldier was interested. "I think, Lieutenant," I answered uncertainly. "E.J., it turns out, higher than Prapora. But our brother, the son of a peasant, before or above the foreman, and do not dream, no matter how capable and smart you are. And here you are, with milk still on your lips, and you've already earned the rank of officer. Appreciate it, brother. Thank the Soviet power, protect it if you've been entrusted with such an important job." "I will, uncle," I answered seriously. "If necessary, I will not spare my life for our motherland, for the Soviet power." The touched Pyotr Semyonovich suddenly snatched a bottle from his side pocket. "On this solemn occasion we should have a drink?" "You, old drunkard, only want an occasion," Aunt Makrida Dmitrievna, who held my hand tightly, objected angrily. Nothing, Makridushka," said Pyotr Yemyanovich affectionately, hastily pulling out of his pockets cut glasses, a piece of rye bread wrapped in newspaper, and a pickled cucumber. "We'll figure it out in no time, otherwise it's a lost cause. His service will not go well if he doesn't wash off his first rank. Let's move over here," he pointed to the counter of the food stall. With a practiced movement, Pyotr Semyonovich poured vodka into glasses and handed one to me, saying affectionately, "Beautiful, most enormous, the Adetsaude's most beautiful bride." When he noticed that I had only tasted the vodka, he frowned. "B.O. Not our way, brother, not Siberian. Why do you look like a wimp? Clo-bustle, all of you. Be a man." Station bell sounded, warning of the train's departure. Realizing that I would not drink, My uncle thought for a second whether to pour the vodka into a bottle, but waved his hand and poured the contents into his mouth, saying, "Better in US than in the basin," hiding the bottle and glasses. My uncle hugged me. What should I tell my father? When is he going on vacation? Wait for him in 2 weeks. They promised to let him go as soon as he arrived at the unit. "We'll wait," repeated Uncle, following the wagon. "We'll wait." Auntie silently followed her husband, waving goodbye to the departing train with one hand and wiping her tears with the other. It was like coming home for a moment, and what to hide, it was nice to see the emphasized respect of loved ones, how their Sashunka entrusted with an honorable mission with a weapon in his hands to defend the homeland, and not as an ordinary fighter, but as a commander. I parted with my relatives without sadness. I believed that I was leaving for a short time, that soon I would be able to embrace my beloved mother and father, older brother Misha, and little sister Mashenka. The time on the road flew by unnoticed. Unfamiliar places flashed before my eyes. Big cities, villages, very different from our Siberian ones. After the Volga, the forest seemed unusually bright and inviting. They reminded me of birch barks in the southern part of the Omsk region. Gradually, they became less and less. The train was approaching Kharkov. On a sunny Sunday morning of June 22, we stepped out on the platform of Kharkov station. The city was just waking up. Only on the station square there was revival. People were talking animatedly, hurrying somewhere, joking, and no one knew that for 3 hours in the border regions of the country, the tornado of war was raging. The blood of soldiers and civilians was pouring out. Having made sure that the train to Lubny, where our division was stationed, would leave only in the evening, we handed our things in the luggage room and, having a quick breakfast in a cafe, went to get acquainted with the city. As true provincials, we looked around with all our eyes. And when we got to Dzerzhinsky Square, we stopped amazed by its size and the beauty of the surrounding buildings. Andrei Melkotukov, who worked before entering the school in one of the Siberian collective farms, said in surprise. Well, yes, here a whole field can be placed, 10 or 12 desiatinas. Perhaps we'll be. We were exchanging our impressions and did not immediately notice that the public, who were walking around, began to flock to a large loudspeaker hanging on one of the buildings. Without conspiring, we approached the crowd. I glanced at the dial. The hands showed a few minutes to 12. "What's the occasion of the gathering?" Melkotukov asked a young woman standing nearby with a smile. "Maybe there will be dancing?" The woman did not support the joke. Comrade Molotov, the People's Commissar of Foreign Affairs, will now speak on the radio, she said sternly. "Oh my God," an elderly woman, apparently returning home from the grocery store, exclaimed fearfully. "Isn't it war?" "You, auntie, you say." The UN worker who had stopped next to her was indignant. "Maybe it's another border incident. And you say war. With whom should we go to war? A treaty with the German. Have you read the TASS report? No. That's just it. But you don't know politics and yet you say war." The loudspeaker clicked and a muffled, slightly lisping voice spread over the square. "Citizens and citizens of the USSR, today at 4 o'clock in the morning, without making any claims against the Soviet Union, without a declaration of war, German troops attacked our country, attacked our borders in many places and bombed our cities, Zhytomyr, Kiev, Sevastopol, Kaunas." Molotov continued to speak, and in my ears only one thing sounded in my ears. The final words of the People's Commissar, "Our cause is right. The enemy will be defeated. Victory will be for us." My consciousness emphasized them. We were sure that we would win. Molotov's speech was over, but the crowd did not disperse. I looked at the woman accused by a worker of ignorance of politics and saw that large tears were rolling down her wrinkled face. "What's the matter, boys?" the young worker asked us confusedly. After all, the agreement. We waved our hands. For us, this message was a thunderclap. Here and gone vacation, so we'll not have to see my parents, I thought sadly and turned to my comrades. "Guide your guys to the stand. Hurry to the part." In the morning of June 23, we were already at the station Lubny. Here they were unloading military equipment, ammunition, clothing intended, as it turned out, for the units of the 25th Rifle Corps, which included the 162nd Division, where we were going. After checking the documents, we reached the division headquarters by a hitchhiker. After reading the prescription, the captain from the personnel department inquired, "Are you a party member, Lieutenant?" "No." A candidate. Wait, the captain, taking my documents, went somewhere. A few minutes later he returned and ordered me to follow him. Coming to the door, on which hung a sign, head of the political propaganda department, he opened it and, stopping on the threshold, let me through. "Sel's my battalion commissar," he addressed the balding man sitting at the table. "EEI Present Lieutenant Alexander Alchunin Alexander Terentьevich, a graduate of the Novosibirsk Infantry School," and pushed me to the table. Coming out from behind the table, the battalion commissar extended his hand to me. "Antiekhnai, at the school you were deputy political officer." "Yeah." "Did you conduct political briefings with the cadets?" "That's right." "How do you regard the TASS statement of June 14 and yesterday's treacherous attack on our country?" He asked an unexpected question. I kept silent, at a loss. It had never occurred to me to critically discuss the government's diplomatic moves. However, overcoming my embarrassment, I resolutely stated, the TASS statement, in my opinion, once again clearly emphasized the peace-loving aspirations of the Soviet Union and deprived Hitler of the opportunity to justify his aggression. "You are right, Lieutenant," smiled the battalion commissar. "I see that you are well oriented in the international situation. It is especially important now." He looked at me with a probing look and added, "We decided to appoint you deputy commander of the 1st Motor Company for Political Affairs." "After, I'm not a political officer," I involuntarily burst out. "We must, Lieutenant, we must," said the head of the department tiredly. "We have enough commanders, but political workers, a big shortage. You are a candidate of the party and have experience in political work?" To the battalion commissar, apparently anticipating objections, stepped toward me and patted me affectionately on the shoulder. Nothing, Lieutenant, you'll manage. Go to the regiment, take over the company." So suddenly I became a political officer. The liaison officer took me to the regimental headquarters, where I talked to the deputy commander of the regiment for political affairs, battalion commissar Fyodor Afanasyevich Panchenko. He was very attentive. He told me about the peculiarities of political work, advised me where to start. At parting, holding my hand, he said, "If at first it will be difficult, do not hesitate to ask for advice. Come any time." The company commander was not there. The duty officer reported that he is at the regimental warehouse, receives missing equipment. Without waiting for his return, met with the platoon commanders, sincerely pleased to learn that all of them had been well trained. Lieutenants Sergei Voronov and Pavel Stepanov graduated from a full course of infantry school, and Junior Lieutenant Semyon Pozdnishev, artillery. In age they were a year or two older than me, but they looked as gormless youths as I did. Soon the company commander returned. He looked old for his 40s and sickly. His uniform hung in a wrinkled sack. His belt buckle dangled somewhere under his belly. Apparently the drill training he had once received had been weathered by his years as a teacher. How will such a commander lead in battle? I thought, deeply saddened by the not at all military look of the junior lieutenant. True, I never had to find out what kind of commander he would have been. He was recalled. Only much later I was convinced that from such purely civilian people in battles, in this cruel and bloody school, often forged excellent commanders. Although the company commander, Junior Lieutenant Van In, did not arouse my sympathy, we somehow managed to put our relations on a business basis at once. We distributed duties, helped each other in our work. The days were filled with receiving and checking weapons, fitting equipment, training. Not everything went smoothly here. Such an incident was always remembered. A live grenade with the ring removed fell out of Vasily Kodakenkov's hands. Realizing that he would not have time to throw the grenade away, the former miner fell on it to save his comrades standing nearby. There was a deafening explosion. The self-sacrifice of the fighter deeply shocked us. And 30-year-old miner Vasily Kodakenkov taught me the first lesson of courage arising from a high consciousness of military duty. In a moment of mortal danger, he remained faithful to the first commandment of the Soviet soldier: die yourself, but help your comrade. If Kodakenkov had not shown such courage, other soldiers and commanders would have suffered. From the first minute of being in the company, I carefully studied the people with whom I was to go into battle. Among the replenishment that arrived in the regiment were residents of the western regions of Ukraine. Loyalty prepared, because they had not served in the army before, but they were in a fighting mood. They were eager to fight in order to drive the Nazis out of their homeland as soon as possible. However, there were also unreliable people among them. Once I witnessed a very unfortunate scene. A Red Army soldier fiercely shook a newcomer of about 22 years old, who frightenedly fought back. "Stop this outrage," I shouted angrily, running up to them. So the Red Army man with difficulty unclenched his white fingers, and, pushing the frightened recruit away from him, sneered angrily through his teeth. "Oh, I'll tear out your filthy tongue for such words." "Why are you misbehaving, Comrade Brushenko?" Having remembered the name of the fighter, I strictly asked. "I'm not outrageous, Comrade Lieutenant, it's him, a viper, hissing like a creeping snake that Germany will smash the USSR, that it's stronger." "Is your name?" Surprised to the extreme. I looked intently at the newly appeared prophet. "Udovichenko," he muttered, without raising his eyes. "So you think that the Red Army will inevitably lose the war?" In my heart, I still hoped that Brushenko was wrong. Udovichenko was silent. "Well, silence is a sign of agreement. You," I concluded. "Who inspired you with such thoughts? On what basis did you draw such a conclusion?" Udovichenko suddenly raised his head and, glittering angrily with his eyes, "I myself bashived the Germans when I visited my brother in Lublin province. They have such a great order, the style of tanks and other machines, everything is rich. No one can resist such an army." His words stunned me. It was the first time I had encountered open hatred of Soviet power. How can this be? I thought. A simple peasant, about whom the Soviet power shows great care and suddenly so hostile. This I could not understand. I decided to consult with the deputy commander of the regiment on the political part. Battalion Commissar Panchenko was very busy, but when he learned that I came to him for advice, he immediately accepted. Having listened to my excited story, he shook his head. "Yes, this is an exceptional case. This is a clear enemy. Of course, it does not reflect the sentiments of a simple West Ukrainian peasant, but nothing will find out where the wind is blowing from." The Duct and Mortar Company had an exam. It conducted live firing. All of us, of course, worried. Many mortar men had never held a live mine in their hands. At first, everything went well. Mortar crews had to hit the target with 5 mines in the prescribed. All but one of them fulfilled the task. The best time showed the calculation of Sergeant Siroshta. It was the turn of the last unit. I decided to leave the firing position to read the combat sheet prepared here at the firing range, as suddenly I noticed that the next mine had not yet flown out of the barrel, and the loader is already lowering the next one, an explosion and imminent loss of life. Fortunately, I had not yet moved away from the loader, and for a split second I was ahead of him, pushing him aside so that he fell, but I did not let the mine out of my hands. Almost simultaneously, the previously lowered mine burst out of the mortar barrel with a noise and, shaking the air, flew to the target. The face of the loader was covered with a deadly pallor. Still with the mine in his hands, he knelt down. I snatched the mine from him, lowered it into the channel of the barrel, and felt the streams of sweat running down my back, as if I had dragged a dozen or two 6-pound sacks. In the evening, we analysed this case in detail with the commanders of the squads and suggested that they conduct additional training with the mortars. 2 days after this, almost tragic event followed the order to go on a campaign. It was not difficult to guess that our way lay to the front, where, according to the reports of Sovinform Bureau, the situation was getting more difficult by the end. In the Baltics at the end of June, the Soviet troops were repulsing attacks on the western Dvina. In Byelorussia, since June 26, fierce battles were fought in the vicinity of Minsk, and only in Ukraine the troops of the southwestern front made counterattacks on the enemy still in the border areas. It was difficult to predict to which section of the front our division would be sent, but since we were marching to the west, to Peryatin, a rumour spread. We were going to the Kiev area. In the area of Peryatin our regiment was stopped. Company commander and I was called by the commander, Captain Tunkanozhenko, and announced that on the night of June 28 at Peryatin station the regiment was to be loaded into echelons. Before loading again, there was a sharp turn in my commanding fate. I had already noticed that Combat Tunkanozhenko tries to express his thoughts extremely briefly and clearly. Therefore, I was not surprised by the brevity of his order. "You," he pointed his hand at my commander, "surrender the company, and a gesture in my direction. Accept. Report back in an hour." Stunned by this turn of our fates, we silently paused from foot to foot, waiting for further clarification, but the commander waved his hand unhappily. "Execute." "And what will happen to me?" timidly asked Junior Lieutenant Vannon. At the disposal of the division headquarters, threw on the move Tonkonoshenko, hurrying to the place of the battalion column. The junior lieutenant continued to stand, comprehending what had happened. I touched him by the elbow. Calm, Ilya Maximovich, we must hurry. We hurried to the company. Having built it, Vanin announced my appointment and began to say goodbye to the commanders and Red Army men, going around the formation and shaking hands with each of them. At the same time, he repeated the same words. Goodbye, good luck to you in the battles. I understood his condition. He had just had time to get acquainted with people, to feel needed, and suddenly he was recalled. Saying goodbye to me, Vanin expressed an underlying fear. What if they won't let me go to the front? Maybe I'm too old for the front? How old are you, Ilya Maximovich? I objected, but in my heart I doubted. But it's true that they might send me to the rear. After all, I'm over 40, and involuntarily rejoiced that I was only 19. After seeing my former commander 100 meters from the location of the company, I shook his hand firmly. We said goodbye. I never found out. Did Ilya Maximovich manage to get to the front, or was he sent to the rear? We never met again. An hour later, I led the company to the designated point, from where we marched in a battalion column to the place of loading. We didn't get to the train at once. At first, fearing enemy air raids, secretly positioned in the nearest woods. Here, all unit commanders were gathered by the regiment commander, slender, thin Lieutenant Colonel Grigory Denisovich Mukin. With special interest, I looked at the commanders of the rifle battalions. After all, first of all, on their skill, determination, and initiative, depends how the plans of the regiment commander will be realized, how, finally, the fate of each battalion. I noted with satisfaction that our commander, Captain Tonkonoshenko, stood out for his youth and dress. Compared to him, the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Major Klebnikov, who seemed to me an old man, although he was then a little over 40, looked baggy and slow. To match him and the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Captain Nikolai, they are not to command battalions, I thought, and some base to manage. Subsequently, I was surprised and delighted to learn that the peaceful appearance of combatants misled me. In the first battles, they showed exceptional orderliness, calmness, and personal courage. The regiment commander, clearly pronouncing each word, outlined the rules of behavior of soldiers and commanders during the echelon. The main requirements were not to leave the car without a command, even in case of a Nazi air raid. For each straggler, the senior of the car is responsible. Lieutenant Colonel Mukin ordered to organize on the way to study the combat regulations and weapons, and Battalion Commissar Panchenko reminded of the need to conduct daily information. The task is clear, comrades, commanders, asked Mukin. Chain clear. In one voice echoed Tonkonoshenko and Nikoluk. Klebnikov did not hurry with the answer. Chewing his lips, he took a deep breath. Regimental commander, as seen, disliked Klebnikov for excessive slowness. Angrily asked, You, Comrade Klebnikov, anything unclear? Everything is clear, reluctantly replied the major. Here, Captain Tonkonoshenko explained to us that our battalion follows the 1st echelon. Behind us, the regimental headquarters with Klebnikov's battalion and artillery, then the 3rd Battalion and other units of the regiment. No sooner had we dispersed by companies, as I was stopped by the propaganda instructor senior political officer Loban, the Comrade Altunen, to the battalion commissar Panchenko. Approaching Panchenko, I waited until he finished talking to the political officers who surrounded him. Having freed himself, the battalion commissar extended his hand to me and said, Well, congratulations, Lieutenant, on your new assignment. It's a pity, of course, that you're leaving political work, but judging by your look, you're not upset. Noticing that I hesitated, he confirmed. I see. I hope you will become a good commander. I will try. I readily replied, glad that Panchenko took kindly to my return to the command position. Calling the political officer standing in the distance, Panchenko said, Meet your deputy in the political department. Your political officer Stadnyuk, with a sense of dignity, called himself approached, dressed in a uniform that had not yet had time to crumple. While I was trying to guess whether he was a teacher or a party worker, the battalion commissar, interrupting my thoughts, Nay, do you know Comrade Altunin, who the admirer of the fascist army turned out to be? You mean Udovichenko? Yes, about him. His father, before the reunification of Western Ukraine, owned 60 tenths of land, which the Soviet authorities gave to the laborers who worked for him. In the haste of the first days of the war, many of them were mobilized into the army. Now it is necessary to weed them out. Such people will not fight for the Soviet power. They are potential traitors. It's good that the enemy nature of the Kirkul showed up in time. I rejoiced fervently. It is better to stand face to face with the enemy than to have him at your back. This incident, which left an unpleasant residue in my soul, made it easier for me later to understand one of the main origins of the vile treachery of the Vlazovites. As darkness fell, we were put into the carriages. The train, gaining speed, moved not to the west as we had supposed, but to the north. Priluki, Bakhmuk, Konotop, the names flashed one after another. We delayed at the stations only to replenish water and coal. Only once the echelon stayed at a blind station for 2 days and a night. On the way we quickly settled in the Teplushki, watched for cleanliness. At stops we hurried to the platform, where field kitchens were located and where 3 times a day we received hot food. All our free time we studied. We made sure that every soldier could replace a comrade in a combat formation. Only under this condition we could hope that the mortar would not fall silent if at least one man remained alive. Whether we managed to achieve this, the battle will show. So as a teaching of the way we were lucky, the train was never bombed, although there were broken cars and even steam locomotives. That's why we prepared thoroughly for the Nazi air raid. There was established a clear order of abandonment of cars and dispersal of platoons in case of destruction of the way. They practiced in conducting volley fire from rifles on descending airplanes. Special anti-aircraft installations in the battalion was not, but Captain Tunkanojenko, before loading into the wagons, got somewhere 4 bogie axles. Mounted them on the platforms. He fixed on them ordinary machine guns equipped with anti-aircraft sights, and now 4 homemade anti-aircraft machine guns were constantly aimed at the sky. Around them, the most trained machine gunners were on duty round the clock, till they protect the echelon from the planes. This thought worried, I think, not only me. The roar of aircraft engines attracted the attention of all the inhabitants of the Teplushka. The mortars huddled near the doorway. In the open door of the Teplushka can see how one after another, with a growing howl, rushing towards the echelon cars with swastikas on the wings. Through this howl you can hear intermittent tapping. That is firing soldiers on duty at the machine guns. Well done. I think with admiration. After all, none of them had not yet been under enemy fire and did not waver. If the train then speeds up the run, then almost stops, maneuvering the driver who has been under bombardment more than once. Bombs explode on the right and left of the railroad bed, shrapnel through the thin walls of the Teplushka. Suddenly, one of the soldiers standing at the door silently fell to the floor. A shrapnel blew off the top of his skull along with his cap. I was confused for a moment, then, realizing the danger, I shouted at the top of my voice, "Get down on the floor," and I was the first to carry out the command. Now the splinters are flying over my head. At the opposite door, someone moans loudly. I rush there and see a Red Army man clasping his right shoulder with his palm. Blood is oozing through his fingers. I call the order, and the 2 of us quickly bandage the wounded man. The train is gaining speed, and we, holding our breath, expecting that from minute to minute another bomb will destroy the railroad bed and our echelon will collapse under the rocks. But fascist pilots, having used up ammunition, made a circle over the train and disappeared. So me and my comrades were scorched by the hot breath of war for the first time. How many terrible minutes were experienced afterwards, but this first bombing remained in my memory forever. The bombers flew away, and there was silence in the carriage for a long time. Under the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, everyone silently experienced what had happened. Apparently everyone, like me, had a thought. We had not been in combat and had not seen a fascist alive, but we had already lost our comrades. Sighing, I took out the list of personnel from my clipboard and, after hesitating, crossed out 2 names. Junior political officer Stadnyuk came up to me and handed me a sheet torn from a student's notebook, a letter to the parents of the deceased. Dear parents of our fighting comrade Red Army soldier Fedya Malishenko, Ivana Afanasievich wrote, "Courage. Today a splinter of a fascist bomb interrupted the combat path of your son. We know that your grief cannot be helped by words of sympathy, and yet we consider it our duty to say we will avenge the death of our dear comrade on the fascists. We swear this to you." It would be necessary to address by name and patronymic, I said, returning the letter. I wrote down the home address of the deceased, but the name and patronymic of his parents, unfortunately, I did not guess. Stadnyuk sighed sorrowfully. How can you foresee everything so unexpectedly? Ivan Afanasyevich had a rare ability to quickly get along with people, to provoke them to frankness. More experienced, Ivan Afanasyevich, after graduation, worked as an engineer at the mine. Then he was promoted to party work in the district committee. He helped me a lot in studying my subordinates, in establishing mutual understanding with them, and people in the company picked up strong, reliable, mostly miners from Donbass, TAAT party members and 3 candidates, and even Komsomol members. Proudly reported Stadnyuk. This is our reliable support in battle, Comrade Lieutenant. Only it is necessary to arrange them thoughtfully, so that in each formation there were 1 or 2 communists. That's what we did. Junior political officer is always surrounded by soldiers, then leads a heartfelt conversation, then with youthful enthusiasm arranges a competition, who knows better the duties of mortar numbers. I looked at him and involuntarily smiled, remembering with what excitement on the first day of his stay in the company, he told me that he would try to master the duties of all the numbers. His rippled face was covered with a slight blush of embarrassment, as if fearing that I would reproach him for boasting. Ivan Afanasyevich. Why do you think I can't? You can, Ivan Afanasyevich, you can. I hastened to reassure my energetic deputy. We a few daily training together with mortars. From that day, Stadnyuk did not stop learning. Once I observed such a picture, quite quickly prepared data for firing. In this he was helped by a good knowledge of mathematics. Stadnyuk began to outline in detail to his teacher, the commander of the calculation, Senior Sergeant Polivoda, what, in his opinion, the sight should be set to hit the infantry, lying in a kilometre from the firing position of mortars. Stefan Polivoda listened to the lengthy explanations of Stadnyuk. The commander's language was clearly not given to him, and shook his head disapprovingly. Then, having given a short command, Polivoda asked the junior political officer to repeat it. After several unsuccessful attempts, Stadnyuk repeated the command in a hoarse voice, and with a sense of accomplished duty moved away from the mortar. A heavy storm cloud was rapidly creeping over the ground, which had not had time to cool down during the short night from yesterday's heat. Suddenly it started pouring rain. We rejoice, now fascist planes are not afraid. After the first bombardment, we were convinced that the efforts of Captain Tonkanozenko were not wasted. Although the machine gunners failed to shoot down a single bomber, the intense machine gun fire made the Nazi pilots nervous. They indiscriminately dropped bombs. From the low clouds, grey blanket enveloped the ground-scorched July heat, as if from a sponge clenched by a powerful palm flowing warm rain. The mortarmen, soaked by the damp stuffiness, are quietly exchanging their impressions on the bunks and at the half-open door, and I inquisitively look at my subordinates, trying to imagine each of them in battle. I have not yet had time to properly study the fighters and commanders, but now they no longer seem to me a faceless mass, as on the first day. I have a special sympathy for the company foreman Nikolai Fedorovich Okremenko, a powerful Ukrainian with chubby ruddy cheeks and lopsided wheat mustache. Large light blue eyes with reddish lashes and a nose the size of a small round potato give the petty officer an extremely good-natured look. True, I am bothered by Okremenko's economic thriftiness. He drags everything in sight into the car. Old torn uniforms, broken Kerzovi boots thrown away by someone, soldiers' kettles, and at one station he brought a box of nails, a saw and— Why do we need it, Comrade Petty Officer? I wondered. In a good economy, Comrade Commander, there's nothing superfluous. Everything will be useful. Maybe we'll have to build something. Nikolai Fedorovich tries to speak in Russian, but automatically weaves Ukrainian words into his speech. I advise him to hand over the things we don't need, and Okremenko, stretching out to his full Bogatyrsky height and blinking his eyelashes. Allow me to wait a little longer. We'll have time to throw it away. If they evict us from the cars, flies eat them. Flies eat them is Okremenko's favorite saying. Company sanitary instructor Sidor Petrenko became a dear friend of the petty officer. He holds himself with the aplomb of an experienced doctor, although he went to the front from the second year of medical school. When the other day a soldier Osachi complained to him about a minor stomachache, our company escalopist laid him on the bunk, diligently probed, looked at his tongue and thought for a long time. Then he took out a notebook and began to write something. When he had finished, he tore off a sheet and handed it to me. Diagnosis, I managed to read the title, but I couldn't make out the rest, because Petrenko had written out several medical terms in neat Latin letters. What is this? I wondered. Petrenko, coming closer, whispered in my ear. My comrade Komroti, Osadche must be hospitalized immediately. He may have typhoid fever. Typhoid fever. That's not enough. I was horrified, for a moment imagining how the infection spreads in the company and disables it. Having read the alarm on my face, Petrenko added with an important look. Don't worry. I will take immediate measures to stop the infection. Until the next stop, Petrenko isolated Osadchi from his comrades in a corner of the car and did not leave him for a minute. The frightened Osadchi immediately shrank, turned pale, small beads of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his eyes became watery. Apparently his fever was rising. Having found out what we were whispering about, Stadnyuk, waving his finger at Petrenko, quietly asked, Are you sure of the diagnosis? Noticing that Petrenko was embarrassed, he added, In that case there was no need to sound the alarm without a fire. The soldiers looked sympathetically at their comrade and whispered anxiously. Someone behind my back quietly asked, What happened to him? Who knows, most likely, cholera bow plague. Or maybe leprosy. It's all the same. He's not sweeter than radish. Noticing the worried faces of the soldiers, Stadnyuk sat down next to Osadchi and putting his hand on his head. Well, what are you, comrade Osadchi Sour? Like a 100-year-old grandmother? A little stabbing and you're already going to die. What's wrong with me? The soldier revived. You. It's my comrade's instructor who is saying that my stomach is bad, but I'm fine, and my stomach has already gone. However, at night at the nearest bus stop, Petrenko, with the help of a petty officer, still brought Osadchi to the battalion medical station to an experienced paramedic. And what was our surprise when in the morning at the next stop, after the good-natured, smiling petty officer, a cheerful and joyful Osadchi jumped into the car. Everything is normal, Comrade Komrati, Okrymenko reported. Osadchi, as Comrade Hildscher announced, is not contagious. He has a little diarrhea, so we will cure him quickly. Having made sure that he was not in any danger, Osadchi merrily exchanged remarks with his comrades, laughing at his recent fright and at the mistake of our scientist medic. Confused Sidor Petrenko appeared in the car only in the evening, during the distribution of lunch. Using the lunch rush, he climbed into the carriage and, having received a portion of soup, climbed into the upper bunks, where he fell asleep until morning. Poor company Escola pissed. If he had known that on the diagnosis it happened, and academicians stumbled, he would be calmer to survive his mistake. However, the scientific miscalculation of our medic did not shake the respect Okrymenko to his friend. He still addressed him, despite the youth of a former student, by his first name and patronymic. The farther we move to the northwest, the more often we are delayed at the stations. The railroad is jammed in both directions. Trains go in a continuous stream. Many sanitary trains with wounded. Our train was bombed 2 more times, and again we managed to get through without significant losses. At stops, the soldiers, having heard the stories of the wounded, returned to the carriage visibly gloomy, thoughtful. A wounded man always assesses the situation more pessimistically than a healthy one. More and more often, Ivan Afanasyevich Stadnyuk finds himself in a quandary. It is difficult to convincingly explain the unexpectedly difficult situation at the fronts for the Soviet people from the brief newspaper reports of those days. At the next station, Ivan Afanasyevich ran to the staff car in the hope to get fresh information. The echelon was already picking up speed when the junior political officer jumped into the carriage and, frantically pulling out a quadruple-folded newspaper from his uniform pocket, shook it above his head. All to me! The soldiers surrounded him in a tight ring, making sure that he had attracted the attention of those present. Stadnyuk unfolded the newspaper and, looking around at everyone with a serious look, and listened to the address to the Soviet people, with which Comrade Stalin spoke on July 3 on the radio. The rather weak voice of the junior political officer was suddenly filled with mettle. Comrades, citizens, brothers and sisters, fighters of our army and navy, I am addressing you, my friends. Stadnyuk's voice came clearly through the rhythmic clatter of the wheels. The treacherous military attack of Hitler's Germany on our motherland, launched on June 22, continues. Despite the heroic resistance of the Red Army, the enemy continues to climb forward. Stadnyuk reads out the part of the speech in which Stalin lists the areas of the country occupied by Nazi troops. The eyes of the soldiers staring at the junior political officer seem to be asking, "What's the matter? Why did this happen?" And Stadnyuk, as if answering the questioning looks of the listeners, continues. How could it happen that our glorious Red Army surrendered a number of our cities and districts to the fascist troops? Are the German fascist troops really invincible troops, as the fascist boastful propagandists trumpet incessantly? Stadnyuk looks around at the excited listeners as if he were the one asking them the question, then resolutely exclaim, "Yes, of course not." Correct. I recognize the smoky baritone of Fyodor Brashenko, a loader from Sergeant Mission's squad. We beat the samurai. We'll beat the fascists too. The junior political officer continues to read excitedly. Mizuki's mind, fascist army can be, and will be defeated just as Napoleon's armies were defeated in Wilhelm. And all the mortarmen give a friendly applause. Stadnyuk, raising his hand to restore silence, continues. As for the fact that part of our territory was nevertheless captured by the Nazi German troops, this is mainly due to the fact that the war of Nazi Germany against the USSR began under favorable conditions for the German troops and unfavorable for the Soviet troops. By the expression of faces we can see that the Red Army is struck by Stalin's desire not to downplay the danger that threatens the country, but on the contrary to emphasize it, especially shocked us words. The matter is thus about the life and death of the Soviet state, about the life and death of the peoples of the USSR, about whether to be the peoples of the Soviet Union free or to fall into enslavement. I noticed how the faces of the fighters turned pale. It was not difficult to understand what a storm in their minds caused these truly terrible words, uttered by a man whose every word was for us an immutable truth. We realized that if Stalin, with all his inherent directness and severity, Stalin declares such a possibility, it means that the situation at the front is more serious than we believed. Well, no, I think, clenching my fists. Better death than the fascist yoke, to turn into their slave. It will never happen. By the faces of the soldiers I realize that similar thoughts worry them too. Finally, Stadnyuk, shaking his head resolutely and sternly circling the eyes of the listeners, in a firm voice says, "It is necessary that in our ranks there is no place for whiners and cowards, panickers and deserters." The mortars look at each other, as if trying to make sure that among them there are no scoundrels and cannot be, and the words "it is necessary" to immediately bring to the court-martial all those who by their panic and cowardice hinder the cause of defense, cause universal approval. Stadnyuk neatly folds the newspaper, wraps it in a handkerchief and hides it in the breast pocket of his uniform. You realize, comrades, that not an ordinary, but a people's war against fascism has begun, and we will not be alone in it. We will be supported by all the honest people of the world. Stadnyuk's soft voice was drowned in the excited cries of the Red Army soldiers and sergeants, fiercely shaking his white arms above his head, black from anthracite embedded in the pores. Vasil Siroshtin, the commander of the calculation, mischievously flashing his white teeth, shouted, "Would the fascist knights like to take a blood bath? We'll give them a lead bath. Right, boys?" "Yes, Vasil, yes." Comrades confirm. The fascists will never see victory. You, Fyodor Brashenko's smoky baritone is heard again. Just to get to them, the son of a bitch kids, he threatens imaginary fascists with his fist. Comrades, Pater Glysov's mournful bass attracted general attention. There was silence in the Teplushka. This medium-sized stately miner enjoys unquestionable authority among the mortars. Many of them know him from their joint work in the mine. "Oh dear comrades," repeats Lisov, straightening slightly slouching shoulders. A noticeable scar, cutting the right cheek, makes the unsmiling face of the Potug stern. Only a calm look of large grey eyes softens it. "Having heard the address of Comrade Stalin, we swear to beat the bloody fascists to our last breath," says the Potug slowly, as if mentally weighing each word. "We'll beat them in our own way, in the miners' way, with a pickaxe at their throats. We'll show them where the crayfish are." Lysov swung his fist threateningly. The scar on his cheek turned purple, and in response passionate cries were heard from all sides. "We swear. We will beat the damned. We swear. We swear." In the Teplushka, for a long time continues excited conversation. The speech of the chairman of the State Defense Committee was in those difficult days truly a ray of light, which the Central Committee of our Leninist Party illuminated the path to victory over the deadly enemy. I was particularly struck by the fact that the party, in those difficult days for our motherland, proclaimed the slogan of helping all the peoples of Europe groaning under the yoke of German fascism. This was the most convincing evidence of the confidence of the leaders of our Communist Party and the Soviet government in victory over the fascist aggressors. The third week of the war began. Our echelon passed some large city, dissolved in the evening gloom. Not a single light was shining. Already at the exit from the city, someone shouted to the switchman who met the train at the crossing. What town? Nozium Smoli Ensk came from the darkness. When we passed Radnia, it became clear that we were going to Vitebsk. However, after Liozno station, the driver abruptly slowed down. Pulling aside the door of the Teplishka, I tried to find out the reason for the stop. Suddenly, one of the commanders jumped out of the first carriage, where the battalion command was located, and shouted something. From car to car, a command is transmitted. Unload, unit commanders, to the battalion commander. Having entrusted Stadnyuk to take people out of the cars and disperse them, I hurried to the headquarters car. There, in deep thoughtfulness, walked Captain Tonkanoshenko. When the commanders of the units gathered, he looked at them carefully and strictly. "Oh, oui, comrades." The captain's voice was calm. "The way along the railroad is closed. The next station is destroyed. Further to follow on foot. The main forces of the division have already moved to Yanovichi and further to Vitebsk. Our regiment is to join them." Having listed the settlements through which the battalion's route lay, the commander instructed the Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Veselov, to indicate to the company commanders the locations before the start of the march, the order of the units. When the Chief of Staff fulfilled this instruction, Tonkanoshenko spoke again. "Comrades, on the march be especially vigilant. There is no solid front. It is possible sudden attack not only small airborne troops, but also broken through mobile enemy units. When meeting with the enemy, act actively. Pay special attention to reconnaissance and observation.